Harvard Business School professor Benjamin Edelman. He's co-author of a study which he says shows that on Airbnb, African-American guests are rejected more often than white guests. Also with us is Fatima Gilliam, former Citigroup Director of Diversity Recruitment. She now runs her own consultancy firm, and she says she changes her name when she's on Airbnb to make sure she can book a room or a place or a mansion. Welcome to Power Lunch. Good to have you both here. Professor, this individual tried to rent a room in Philadelphia for a weekend. He says that he was rejected. He went back and created two other identities where he pretended to be white, and he says that same person accepted those two people. You did a study, so I'm assuming this kind of situation doesn't surprise you.
It doesn't surprise me at all. It's completely consistent with what we found in our study.
And what did you find?
We found that African-American guests were about 16% less likely to get a yes from a host. If a black guest applies, their chance of getting a yes is lower than a white guest, with everything else equal about them, save only for the name, a name that might suggest being white or being black, as the case may be.
No photos, correct?
That's right. We put a gray outline of a person with no racial characteristics, no face, nothing like that.
So white guests 50% of the time got a yes, while African-American guests only got a yes 42% of the time. And you're consistent. You are convinced that based on the way you designed the study, that it is solely due to race?
That was what we were trying to achieve, and we think we did it right. These guests were both rookies on Airbnb. Neither of them had any reviews or any reputation, any linked friends, nothing like that. But the black rookies had a lot more trouble than the white rookies.
And just so people know, the way you did that was based on names. So, for example, a white girl would be named Kristen, whereas an African-American girl would be named Tamika. An African-American male would be Darnell or Rashid, and a white male would be Brad, correct?
That's right. We used the Massachusetts census data to get the whitest and blackest names as they existed in the Massachusetts population of people who are in their 30s today.
Fatima, tell us about your experience. I saw in the notes that when you go to Paris, for example, and you book on Airbnb, you change your name.
Yes, I mean, with a name like Fatima Gilliam, people either presume with a name like Fatima I'm either a Muslim or I might be black, because sometimes people pronounce it as Fatima. And so when I was going there several months back, I made sure that when I created my Airbnb profile so that I wouldn't be discriminated against, I changed my name to Jane Smith and didn't have a photo up. And it wasn't until I actually secured the location, paid for it, did I tell the person what my real name was.
Professor, is there anything to be done about this? Can you create a platform? Could Airbnb create a platform that would avoid this kind of situation?
Absolutely. There's no reason why a host needs to know a guest's first name, last name, or photograph in order to assess whether the guest is trustworthy. If the guest has paid the money, that's a pretty good start, unlike a hotel, say, which needs to worry whether you're going to pay upon departure. If there's a worry about the safety or the reputation of the guest, okay, then Airbnb should verify the driver's license or maybe run a credit check, what have you. Check that you really live where you say you live. Check that your IP address matches your mailing address. Incidentally, Airbnb does do many of those things, and in fact, if a black guest creates a new account in a fake name and then Airbnb asks to see a scan or a fax of the driver's license, what then? Black guests can't just go around creating fake accounts in other people's names. That'll work for some people some of the time, but about half the time, Airbnb will go and verify them before the transaction is completed.
It's interesting, Fatima, right? Because Uber, for example, when you talk about a disruptor and an online disruptor, actually, we found in New York City, for example, that it's far more likely that you can get an Uber in an area where African Americans live as opposed to a taxi. So, I mean, in some ways, technology can be an equalizer, in other ways not necessarily.
Well, I think it also speaks to a broader issue that might be going on with the tech sector as a whole. I mean, if we're going to talk about Uber, Uber has its own challenges. I mean, they've run promotions in New York that discriminate against Harlem and Upper Manhattan. So I'll table the Uber issue right now, but I think what's going on with Airbnb is something that permeates through the entire tech sector. When you look at companies like Google, and Google has 2% black, 3% Latino, 30% women, or you could look at Airbnb that has 7% Latino, 3% black, you know, they have an internal problem, and it's not just about their platform.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Great to have you here. We reached out to Airbnb. They have a very long blog post about this situation. Here's part of it. They say discrimination based on race has plagued societies for centuries, and sadly, this kind of contemptible behavior takes place online and offline. They go on to say they do not support it in any way, and that they've tried to do things such as instant book, where actually you just pay right away and there's no discussion about whether or not the place is available or not.